welcome everyone. It is 3:30 on Wednesday, February 17th, 2021, and today we are having a work session. So thank you to all of our board members, and I just want to remind everyone today is the first day that we are actually broadcasting live. So thank you so much for being mindful of that. And just as a reminder, we are going to be broadcasting live promptly at 3:30. So please make sure that everyone logs on 5 to 10 minutes early, since we were going to actually be going live right at 3:30. So if anyone has issues, just let me know. But otherwise, I do expect everyone logged on 5 to 10 minutes early. So thank you. So I'm going to jump into it and just do our roll call. Joshua Scove.
Here.
Thank you, Josh. And Don Norden.
Here.
Thank you, Don. Emily Secord.
Here.
Thanks, Emily. Stephen Yett.
Present.
Thank you, Stephen. Carl Ye. Oh,
Here.
sorry about that. And I am here also. So I have no comments. AJ, did you?
First, just making sure you can hear me. Can you hear me?
We can. You sound good.
Okay.
We could hear you, now we can't. Do you want to try again?
You're now on mute, yeah.
Okay, there you go. Just wanted to indicate, and I turned my camera off just to prove my quality of my sound, but today's work session is for the board to have a comprehensive discussion and presentation about development of a strategic business plan. This will be the first development in LTD's history. So the job you have today is very important. So I really want to thank the board of directors for taking strong leadership in this first step. This is a discussion we've been having for about 4 years. Carl and Don, who've been on the board the longest, probably remember we started talking about developing a 3 to 10 year vision and developing a strategic business plan that really supports that vision. So today I just want to make sure that I comment that the board has taken a lot of steps and there's been a lot of work done before today. So I definitely want to commend the staff for the work they've done to getting us here today and thank the board for really having strong leadership in taking this very important step. This will set LTD up for the future in really developing a very targeted way, a very clear vision for its employees, for our community, and for all that see us nationally about the importance that we place on making sure that we meet our community's commitment for better transportation. So that's just something that I am really proud of and happy to be part of LTD in the time that a lot of people are still trying to figure out how to survive. We're talking about how do we move forward strategically. So I think that's something that this board leadership should be really proud of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, AJ, for those words. Really quick, any announcements or additions to the agenda for our work session today? Okay, I don't see any. So let's roll right into our presentation we have today. So today is the Strategic Business Plan Development Overview. I am going to turn it over to Tom, and we can't wait to hear what we have in store today. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. So good afternoon, board members. Today's work session, as AJ noted, is focused on providing the board with an overview of the strategic business plan development process. We have Lindsay Schofield and Mark Ash from TransPro, and I didn't see Michael. Is Michael on tonight? From Avia Corporation, to provide an overview of the process they'll be employing in the development of our strategic business plan. I'll turn the Zoom podium over to them to provide that presentation, but I want to call out a couple of things for the board's attention. First, we've invited members of the Strategic Planning Committee to listen in on the presentation and the board's discussion tonight. As I indicated in the AIS, we would like the board to spend some time in the context of what you hear from the consultant team tonight with respect to process, discussing your thoughts on the role that the SVC might play over the next 4 months, leading up to the development of their recommendation to you in June. We'll reserve time near the end of the work session for that discussion. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay, who will kick off the presentation.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, everyone. It's nice to meet you. I know you've had an opportunity to speak with Mark Ash, our CEO, and I will actually run through the agenda and then let him introduce our firm and a little bit more about the project before I get into some of the details of the tasks and the rest of the work session that we have planned. So we'll start off again with just some introductory statements. We'll share an overview of the tasks and approach to completing the plan and really using it as a transformative opportunity for the organization. We'll share back some of what we've heard through the one-on-ones that you all have engaged in over the past couple of weeks. We'll share some of the detailed objectives and deliverables to expect throughout this process. We'll touch on the schedule to ensure that we are going to actually deliver a plan as promised for board adoption in June. We want to spend a bit of time on the communications plan, and then, as Tom mentioned, we'll reserve time at the end to detail out and have discussion around the role of the board and the strategic planning committee in the process. So with that, I will turn to Mark Ash just to share a little bit more context and overview for us.
Super. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for making time. Mark Ash, CEO of Transpro Consulting, and I believe I've had the chance to speak with just about every one of the board members in a one-on-one, and appreciate your time both for that conversation and certainly for your service to both the agency and the community by being here. This is really the cornerstone of what our team does, is work with public sector organizations across a multitude of areas, transportation being one, of working to think strategically about the outcomes that the organization is looking to achieve, and then aligning board and management teams to build business plans to achieve those outcomes. So often in government, agencies get caught up in what it is that they are, quote, doing, as opposed to thinking about the outcomes that they are attempting to produce. Once a team and its board have aligned upon the outcomes that they're endeavoring to produce, it's then building that purposeful work activity to produce those outcomes, and then a performance scorecard to measure whether the work is actually working to produce the outcomes that are necessary. Everything is focused back on trying to deliver the outcomes that is critical. And as Lindsay begins to jump into the details, how do we begin to create that culture of ownership within the organization such that employees are able to see how their daily work affects the outcomes of the organization that the board ultimately connects with its senior management team to ensure that we're producing. So this is the work that we have done with transit agencies from the Sacramentos and the Austins and the Charlottes of the world to much smaller organizations as well. And we're proud to have the opportunity to work with this board and this management team towards aligning upon a similar process. So I'll throw back to Lindsay, and Lindsay, maybe you can take us into the detail, and then I'll begin to share some of the concepts behind building a strategic business plan specifically for LTD.
Thanks, Mark. So we wanted to share at the outset what the process will look like. And again, this is a proven process that we've deployed across the country. And so it includes starting out with a refresh of the mission, vision, core values, and goals. We're well underway with this project, so we'll report back on how we actually achieved this task, but it involves discovery and workshops, engaging with key folks throughout the organization to come up with the overall direction of the organization over the next 3 to 10 years. We next move into what we call scorecards to create a culture of ownership. And this encompasses how we measure at the organization level and at the department level the things that matter to actually drive those outcomes and achieve the mission and vision and those overall success outcomes. It also is where we talk through the work activities and the items that will be funded and financially feasible for LTD to deliver over the time frame of the plan. Next, we, in concurrence with this, we're drafting a communications plan. This will address both the internal and external communications during the project, as well as in regards to the rollout of the plan. So we will be actually kicking off this task this week, and we will be having some conversations to further advance it. So that's why we would like to have a bit of discussion with you all up front, as well as we develop the plan for the next coming months throughout the project process. And then finally, we bring it all together into a cohesive, actionable document. This is a document that you'll be proud of, that you'll be proud to share with the community, and will bring great clarity. But the other thing that we want to instill is that it's not just the plan. This is the foundation and a starting point. So the plan is very actionable in the sense that it provides tools that the management team can use on a quarterly basis to monitor progress. And so it's always looking back at the connection between the work activities, the things we're measuring, whether they're actually having the results that we think they're going to have, and making those adjustments if necessary throughout the years that this plan guides the strategy and direction. So that's just a bit about the actual process and tasks. Are there any questions related to the process or tasks within the process? All right, and we can certainly answer questions as well if they come up throughout the work session. So next, I'd like to pass back to Mark. We've had a chance to digest some of the themes from the one-on-ones and wanted to share back and see if this resonates as a group. This will be used to inform how we go about this process and making sure that we're hitting on things that are important to you all to get out of this process as well. So Mark, I will pass to you.
Thanks so much. One of the things that, as Lindsay was taking us through the 4 core elements of the engagement that the agency has brought us onto your team to support, is the recognition that this process is not a project, that it establishes a new way of doing business, right? That it begins to focus all senior leaders from the board, certainly from the management team, in thinking about the outcomes that the organization is looking to produce, doing the right work, measuring the right things, focusing on the measurements to drive the adjustments that we might need to make during the course of the year, ultimately to produce those outcomes. And so over the course of the last several weeks, we've had the opportunity to visit with each of the board members individually. And I think the good news from our conversation with each of the board members is it relatively easily, which may be a surprise to some of you, relatively easily coalesced around 4 key themes, at least from our perspective. So I wanted to share those with you this afternoon and begin to get your feedback if we're capturing this correctly as we begin to build your strategic business plan for going forward. So the first theme that we heard from the board was this interest, and I might even use the word thirst, for establishing clear direction and clear outcomes for the organization. That there was almost unanimous interest, I think, amongst the board to being open to thinking about outcomes rather than activity. How do we think about the outcomes that we're endeavoring to produce? And so clear commentary back from the board in regards to that theme. The second theme that we heard from board members was an openness and an interest in thinking about prioritization, recognizing that all organizations can't be great at everything. In fact, all organizations can't even be good at everything, that it requires making choices and really thinking about what is the right work and the spending of limited dollars to be able to produce the first theme of the outcomes that are critically important to the organization. So making those choices up front and recognizing the outcomes we're looking to produce and where we're willing, where we're going to be openly knowledgeable to focus with less energy, less time, and less budget. The third theme that we heard was in regards to communication. So from the management team to the board, thinking with purposefulness about the outcomes that we're looking to produce rather than the activity of the organization. And certainly, as we might appreciate, if we've not aligned upon outcomes, it makes communication all the more challenging. So with the opportunity with point number one to align upon outcomes, this begins to think about this third theme of making board management communication much more purposeful in nature. And then secondly, really thinking about the broader community. How does the agency begin to communicate in regards to the outcomes that we're looking to produce and be very purposeful in that direction? There was great interest amongst the board in thinking about how to be more purposeful in that regard. And then finally, the fourth theme that we heard from board interviews was thinking about this topic of community value. How do we move beyond the voice of the several and making sure that we're able to demonstrate to the broader community a statistically valid understanding of what's important to the broader community, and then demonstrating that value back from the work activities that we're taking as an organization? How do we, and as you might appreciate, these four themes obviously intersect, right? As we think about the outcomes which we might align upon, by definition, that allows us to prioritize our actions, make our communication much more purposeful and strategic in nature, and with clarity of outcomes, changes the way in which we engage with the community and ultimately communicate the work that we're doing. So why don't I stop there, Madam Chair, if I might, or President, I should say, and see if these themes, which we heard, and again, you may not see everything that you said, we're trying to knit together themes from all of the board members. Does this resonate?
I'll go first and kick this off, Mark and Lindsay. This is very energizing for me. Like, I just think it's really great to how clear and concise you've laid out the process and the themes. And you know, it's not an easy job, right? To take all these different perspectives and align them. And I think you guys did a great job. But like I said, the word I would use is energizing, because I think it's exciting to see the wheels turning on this. Anyone else have any thoughts or reactions?
Josh has his hand up.
Oh, Carl, go ahead. Thank you, Stephen. But Carl, I saw your hand up. Go for it. Sorry.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Josh. I just want to say I'm very glad to hear that there is some common threads amongst the board members, because I wasn't actually so certain of that. So I think that's a great platform to be able to build off of. So thank you very much for finding those common threads.
Josh, did you want to go?
Sure. Yes. No, I agree with Carl's comment. Thank you for finding the common ground here, and I suspect that there was quite a bit of it. I mean, this is pretty substantial, and thank you for laying it out so clearly. I'm wondering. It's interesting when you have this category, the third big theme of communication. So I'll just say, maybe we can unpack this later. Some of the sub bullets there, or some of the ideas in there as you spoke through it, seem like very different things, like the communication among board members and between board members and management versus communication with the community seem like quite distinct challenges. And so I just wanted to name those right now, but no need to discuss them further till later, I think.
I'll just respond tightly to your comment. So agree, there's a lot packed into all of these, right? I mean, each one of them has a variety of issues. I think our view, to the point of the common threads, is as we focus on the first two themes, we'll make the third theme far more purposeful, right? If as an organization, we're aligned upon the outcomes that we want to be able to achieve, and we're able to prioritize our work activity in a strategic way to produce those outcomes, by definition, it establishes the platform for much more purposeful communication. So instead of telling you, I'm going to be silly, what color lug nuts we're going to buy, we can be much more purposeful in our communication to be able to produce the outcomes which the board hopefully, would wind up endorsing. Very good. With that, Madam President, we will carry on. Appreciate
I see hands up from Stephen and Don.
Don, you go first, please.
Well, I'm just wondering, I mean, your organization has studied several different organizations pertaining to this issue and in various sizes of organizations. And I'm just wondering if this is kind of like a template that looks very familiar on your side of the presentation. It's things like, well, we've dealt with all these other organizations and these all similar problems that come up. Or is LTD unique in any way, or are we just part of the general scope of things?
I guess I'll answer in two ways. So I think the answer directly is yes. That there is some uniqueness and some similarity. And so I think the answer is yes in regards to that. I think the second comment that I would make in regards to your question, that I would say surprised us, was the commonality of your themes. And so, as we actually talked to, I think, each of the board members, I think we've talked to everyone, the common themes that arose from those conversations were very connecting. And so I used the word thirst at the outset in talking about outcomes. I thought that was insightful. And so we don't necessarily see that from every board that we might engage with. And it's a clear opportunity for you as a board, and certainly for the management team, to be able to articulate and align around a number of outcomes that are critical to organizational success, which should help you to prioritize your board meetings, your activities, your budget, begin to make your communication more purposeful and speak to the bullets that follow that, and by definition, deliver greater value to the community. So I think the surprise maybe for us was the unanimity of the board aligning around these themes.
Does that answer your question, Don?
Well, it's good enough. It's a response. I'll take that into consideration. Thank you.
Caitlin, may I go, or is someone else ahead of me?
Go ahead, Stephen. Go for it.
Thank you. And thank you, Mark, for that. Appreciate it. You might be addressing this later on in the presentation, but with this initial four-part breakout here seems to be a heavy index on management and the board, which makes sense. But I'm curious, how do we bring in, or how does your process take in all of the stakeholders? We talk about the community values. I don't want to be necessarily just telling them stuff. How do we talk to the stakeholders, the union members, the Hispanic community, the ridership, the two cities? How are they integrated into this? Because they're all key stakeholders and should be an influence, excuse me, on the movement forward for LTD as a whole. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. We're going to be addressing that, during the course of the presentation. So if we don't address it in the detail that you might want, I'll invite you to come back to that question at the end. What we were attempting to do here at the outset was to share the themes from the board as a entity, but as we go deeper in, we're going to share with you the process to do exactly what you're asking for.
Thank you.
Anyone else, or can we move forward? I see thumbs up.
All right. So as we get into the objectives and deliverables, one thing you'll notice is that each of these tasks that we've laid out also has a series of interim deliverables, which speaks to this process that we go through that's really collaborative and allows for discussion and opportunities for feedback throughout the process, so that we don't get to the end point and realize that we've missed something. So we build into each of these task areas a summary of the draft statements. For example, the draft mission, vision, core values, and goals statements. We will have draft, what we call tactics, that you'll notice are things like projects and programs, initiatives that you'll be tackling over the next period of time. The scorecard, and at the organizational level and the department level, this communications plan, which we've identified, the team has identified as being very important and critical to the success of this project. So this is where we'll spend some time this afternoon actually going through some of the components, and again, there'll be opportunities to share back and report back on how various voices are coming and playing a role in the development of the plan. And then finally, both a draft and a final plan. So I will share next the actual schedule for delivery of each of these items. The first task, as I had mentioned, we've already been well underway. So as you know, we've completed board one-on-ones. We're having this session today. We've also had 2 work sessions with LTD staff. So we met first with the directors group and had a retreat to establish and refresh mission, vision, and values, and really made some good progress there, utilizing the past mission and vision statements, and utilizing some of the new the documentation and existing plans and customer surveys and things that really inform the direction of LTD. And then last week we had a session with the Leadership Council, so about 30 to 40 folks in the organization, to go a step deeper, for them to also have input on those key directional statements, to have really robust dialogue around the values of how the organization, how employees will work together and work with one another, how they want to behave in order to convey and embody the key values throughout their work. And we also started to touch on what are those key areas of focus and how would we measure the stake in the ground, those measurable specific success outcomes that will tell us if we're delivering value to the community and our customers. And so we will continue to refine this task throughout this month, and we're really making good progress towards having some solid direction and draft statements. There's a lot of alignment within the team on direction, which definitely makes this an easier process. The next task is around the meat of the plan. So this is really how it comes alive. So we've got on the calendar on March 1st, another session with the directors group. We'll go much deeper into performance metrics and KPIs. We'll also go deeper into the specific projects and initiatives that will connect with the overall areas of focus. And throughout March, we'll continue to work with departments. So we're in the process of working on setting up department meetings. So we'll meet with each of the areas that contribute, again, to organizational success. The draft communications plan, we spoke about that we're really starting that process of identifying the plan, and we'll be building the plan through the next couple of weeks, and then executing on the plan in collaboration with LTD staff. And then the final task, the first draft, is aimed for April 7th to share back a draft version of all of the elements of the plan. And then the final draft would be produced by May 14th so that there's time for the board to ultimately adopt in June. So that is the overall high-level timeline for this engagement. Any questions on process or timeline or schedule? Great. So I'll turn it back to Mark just to walk through a bit of the bigger picture of the role of the board in strategic planning and lead into some of our other items to discuss tonight.
Thanks, Lindsay. So the slide that you see in front of you looks more complicated than it is, but I will break it down into very, very simple steps. It's really a four-step process. It's called why, what, how, who. And for those that are followers or interested in Simon Sinek, we actually didn't know this until we had seen a clip of his, a TED Talk of his. He actually follows a very similar process. He does it in a little bit of a different order than we do, but it's very, very similar thinking. So any interest in Simon Sinek, would urge you to Google Simon Sinek TED Talk, and you'll see a very similar framework pop up from him. The why, the first step, is really establishing purpose. It's thinking through organizational mission, vision, and values. It's being clear on why it is that we exist, what is it that we strive to become, and how will we engage with one another in the pursuit of that why? What are the rules that we will follow as we engage with one another? Purpose. Once we've aligned upon our why, our purpose, the next step in the process is thinking through our outcomes. What does success look like in pursuit of that why? So we played some tape for your management team, and we are often attracted to using a clip from President Kennedy back in the early 60s, where he stood in front of Congress and the nation and talked about sending a man to the moon and back safely by the end of the decade. The purpose was to beat the Soviet Union into space. The success outcome, the what, was to send a man to the moon and back safely by the end of the decade. There's only one way to define that outcome. There's clarity of what success looks like. Once we've defined the outcome that we desire in the pursuit of our purpose, the third step is establishing how will we go about achieving that? What are the work activities that are necessary? What is the budget that's required to fund those work activities? There's some famous scenes that take place when the President Kennedy stood in front of Congress and defined success in pursuit of his purpose. And the NASA engineers are scratching their head because they had no idea how they were going to go about doing this. But the boss was very clear in regards to the outcomes that he established. And now they needed to figure out how will they go about making that happen? What are the milestones that must be achieved? What's the budget, the responsible partners, and the like? And then finally, it's establishing who. Once we know the specific work activities that are going to be engaged, who owns that work? Who owns the performance metrics? Who is responsible for the monitoring of whether the work is working to produce the outcomes which we ultimately cared about? No board is simply going to wait to the end of the year to see that its team didn't qualify for the playoffs, right? We're going to ensure that we are scoring enough points, if you will, in regards to the analogy that I'm establishing. Are we producing the outcomes which we care about, the work outcomes, to produce our what? One last comment that I'll make before I begin to bring in comments for this is the board really lives on the left-hand side of this slide, on the why and the what. The executive team puts in front of the board considerations for the why and the what. And once the board and management team align on why and the outcomes that the board would like to see, typically drafted by your management team, it's then left to the management team to do the right-hand side of the slide. How will we go about executing this? Who do we need on our team to be able to deliver? Now, clearly by direction, the board adopts the plan that management puts together to be able to produce that, but the board lives in the area of the outcomes as created by the management team, whereas on the right-hand side, the management team works to be able to produce the activities to deliver that. Let me share one more slide, Madam President, if I might, and I think then I'll open it up for questions just in regards to the concept behind this. So this begins to establish the framework in a more actionable format for you. So you can see at the top lives our why, our mission, our vision, the outcomes. This is where the board focuses their energy and their attention, the why and the what. The how is in the middle. These are the work activities that we would engage in, the budget that's necessary to be able to produce those work activities. And at the bottom of the slide lives the who. If I might create a visual, for your consideration, it's essentially a teeter-totter where the board lives on one side of the teeter-totter with the president or the chair living out closer to the middle, whereas on the right-hand side lives the employees and the workforce, and closer to the middle lives the CEO. Obviously, all the authority lives with the board. It's incumbent upon the management team to lead the board to the conclusions of the why and the what, and the board ultimately empowers the management team in regards to the how and the who. So before I go forward, Madam President, why don't I pause there and see if that theory resonates in regards to the themes that the board had shared earlier.
And Mark, you're doing great on time. So please, everyone just feel free to ask the questions you need to.
Super, thank you.
You wowed them. They're all speechless.
I'm happy to press forward. We have pretty graphics which help to explain the story nicely.
And feel free, board members, to also raise your hand up because I always forget to open my participant screen.
And happy to respond to any questions in chat as well. Lindsay, so we press forward? So as a board, we'll have aligned around our why and our what. Why are we doing this? Purpose of the organization. Align with your CEO, your general manager, around the outcomes, that man to the moon and back safely by the end of the decade. So not squishy statements, clear definitions of what success looked like. It then becomes incumbent on the left-hand side. The CEO needs to build out a work plan, a how they will go about producing those outcomes. The board is going to hold your CEO accountable to producing the outcomes. These are the work actions. This is one example. It's from another client, but you get the idea here. It's to establish the specific work that must be done to produce the outcome, which the board said is key to them. On the right-hand side lives the performance scorecard. This is the monitoring tool, your dashboard, if you will, that you're able to look at both as a management team and as a board and look to see, is the work from the left-hand side working to produce the outcomes which we ultimately care about. In this model, and I'm not going to go into great detail on it at this point, I'm trying to set the concept up. In the performance scorecard, we're working to measure the key elements that actually matter to produce the outcomes which we care about. Let me give an example. We don't want to measure simply the activity of the organization. How many hours were every employee trained? What we might care about would be the percentage of employees who found training valuable, right? We're thinking about the result of the activity, not the activity itself. And from a board perspective, what you ultimately care about are the outcomes of those activities. Is the workforce more engaged? Is customer satisfaction going up? Are we delivering value to the community? Those are the outcomes which we might ultimately care about. And in the example that you see on the right-hand side, this happens to be a performance scorecard from Charlotte. You'll notice that the metrics are prioritized. Not every metric is created equally in producing the outcomes which we ultimately care about. Some are more important than others. And every metric has a goal and an owner. So it's clear on what it is that we're trying to produce. And from the CEO's perspective, they can manage the owner of that metric to produce the results that are key to delivering the outcomes which the board and the CEO will have aligned around. Lindsay, if you want to advance one more for me. This begins to set up the concept of ensuring at the end of this process that the board is able to evaluate the CEO based upon two factors. First, producing the outcomes which you will have aligned upon. And the second, is the CEO adhering to the values from the purpose, the why, which are so critical to the organization. As the board evaluates your CEO's performance, you now have clarity in regards to those topics. You're able to understand specifically, are we producing the outcomes which we have aligned with our CEO on at the beginning of the year? And secondly, we will have communicated the values by which we expect those outcomes to be produced. And as you might expect, Madam President, a talented CEO will cascade that same process into their management team and from their management team into the rest of the workforce. That it doesn't simply live at the board and CEO level, it cascades throughout the organization. So I'm going to throw back to Lindsay to begin to go into some of the details of how we will enact the theory behind what I just shared from the process that we're going to work with all of you on. But before we move into the details, why don't I take one more crack at questions, and then we'll get into the details of how we will be working with you.
Carl?
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks, Caitlin. Mark, thanks for that little additional information. I was wondering, later on, will there be some additional details about qualitative versus quantitative type outcome measurements? Because I imagine some things that the board might be wanting to evaluate aren't as easily checked off with a number or yes or no.
Are you speaking specifically in regards to the CEO performance review, or are you speaking more in regards to the success outcomes, or both?
I was referring to success outcomes, but actually now that you bring up the CEO ones, yeah, I would say all the above.
Yeah, so I'll take them separately. In regards to the values, by definition, they are subjective in nature, right? So, you know, what does acting with integrity mean? Right? I mean, it's hard to, you know, your definition of that will be different from mine, and they're both right? I mean, it's a difficult way to provide clarity around that. On the other side of the ledger, in regards to the success outcomes, we try with intentionality to take as much vagueness from that definition as we possibly can. So to go back to my Kennedy example, man to the moon and back safely by the end of the decade, there's really only one way to define whether that was achieved. And in July of 1969, we did exactly what the president had committed to. And so, you know, you will not see a success outcome which says, I'm trying to think of one that would be vague. You know, that happier customers, right? You know, what does that mean? So happier customers has a vagueness to it. An improved net promoter score of 10%, there's only one way to define that, right? We will establish a baseline of our net promoter score, and we will improve it by 10% over the course of the year. We'll either achieve that or we won't. Now, just because the organization doesn't achieve the outcome, there may be extenuating circumstances. A year ago, we didn't envision COVID, right? I mean, things will happen during the course of the year, but the success outcome still stands. That's what we had intended to achieve during the course of the year. But simply not achieving it does not mean the organization failed. Does that answer your question on both topics?
Yeah, so I kind of figured, well, I figured you might go into more detail later, but it sounds like we get to set what the parameters would be for success, even if it isn't quite measurable, is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely. What we would propose to bring back for the board's consideration will be several very clear success outcomes, which are absolutely determinable from a factual perspective. On the right-hand side will be the values of the organization, and they will be much more subjective based upon individual board definitions of, I'm making up words, so I don't mean integrity is necessarily one of the values, but you will each define that in a different way. But our goal would be on the left-hand side to have unanimity in regards to what that means.
Yeah, and really quickly, sorry, I didn't mean to take up all the time, but I think from speaking for myself, I should say, I feel like I could use more help, or maybe some other board members would agree with this, to help us shape to help us measure and put into words some of the more difficult things to put into measurements. And because I have found that we have struggled in that area. So that would be something I would like to have more help with.
Yeah, and certainly happy to help the board think about that. What I would invite the board to reflect on is spending your energy in thinking about the outcomes which you as a board care about, and empowering the management team to establish the metrics which will position the agency to produce those outcomes. Let me give you an example. If every single one of your bus operators shows up to work on time, never files a workers' compensation claim, and drives their bus 100% on time, so you will have hit 3 metrics which you might care about, but customer satisfaction falls by 21%. We delivered the metrics we might care about, but we didn't produce the outcome. And at the board level, we care about the outcome. The CEO is responsible for measuring the right activities to produce that outcome. Does that resonate?
Thank you very much.
Josh, did you want to go next?
Yeah, just very quickly, and this is riffing on something Carl said. I think it would be great to figure out how to, and I realize, Mark, that this work scope that you're working under is separate from our planned review of the GM, but as we're trying to kind of build or rebuild the structure of that review, it would be great to blend those processes. I just wanted to put that on the table for everyone now, but we can circle back as appropriate.
And happy to provide to the board, any counsel there. We support a number of agencies on that topic, so happy to be a resource to the board in any way.
Great, thank you.
Mark, I forgot to ask, we are so excited that we have 2 new board members joining us next month. How does that change the process or the work you've already done?
I don't think any.
Okay.
So at this point, I'll go back to my teeter-totter metaphor that I was attempting to create with my hand, since I don't have a visual for you. At this point, we're obviously pulling board members in, and we are happy to have one-on-one conversations even before the new board members start. Certainly happy to have those conversations at the agency's interest. When the board ultimately aligns around outcomes, certainly their voice will be critical because we'll want to have their perspective at the table.
Do you feel like we could do our best to catch them up, or hook them up with this presentation, or how do we best set them up for success in this process?
Yeah, I don't feel that anyone is behind, so we can certainly have this discussion with them as individually or collectively, and I think in 90 minutes time we can have them at the same baseline as the rest of the board, so that as you consider the strategic business plan collectively and the outcomes specifically, they can be as knowledgeable as a new board member could reasonably be.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Mark.
And I will tell you, Caitlin, one of the new board members is listening in tonight. So. Oh,
great. All right.
I guess that means the next time we meet with them, we should make sure we say the same thing we said this evening.
Stephen and Dawn, I just wanted to check in with either of you, since I can't see your face, if you have any questions.
I'm good, but thank you, Caitlin.
Okay.
It's fine with me too, thank you.
Okay, great.
Lindsay, I will throw to you for some detail. Thank you for the focused questions.
Yeah, thank you all. So we wanted to dive in a little bit more in regards to the communications plan. So this is included, as we mentioned, in the scope of work. And at this point up front, as part of the process, really want to talk through the things that we're considering right now and get your input now as well. We'll be meeting and working on this collaboratively with LTD staff, with Cosette and Pat. We'll be setting up a meeting shortly to dive into more detail. So we think about communications both on the internal side and on the external side. For a process like this, the heavy emphasis is on the internal, because we're really setting up a process and a structure and a framework for thinking strategically and having the systems in place to do work that is strategic in nature over time. So that is definitely where the bulk of the communications efforts are focused for this type of project. So during the project, we are having core weekly meetings related to the project management and moving the project forward. There will also be periodic email blasts. There's opportunities through department meetings and all hands meetings for leadership within the organization to be sharing progress, sharing ideas, and also collecting feedback. And then we'll be taking advantage of the Inside the Bus virtual meetings. We'll be meeting with the union. We actually discussed that in our weekly meeting today to engage various voices throughout the internal side of the organization. And then for the plan rollout, but on both ends, we would be identifying an actionable plan that has owners has messaging recommendations for rolling out the plan to the workforce so that everyone is aligned, and the process is also an opportunity itself to build again, more leadership and also that connection to purpose that really drives employee engagement. So there's loads of studies that will connect an individual employee's understanding of how their role in their work impacts something broader, a broader purpose and mission. And so understanding how their day-to-day work is actually serving the community, serving customer satisfaction, having real results, will be an opportunity that arises through the process. On the external side, so we have you all as kind of bridging the gap between internal and external based on the fact that you all represent various constituencies in the community. So through this process, we also hope that you will bring those perspectives from those constituencies. We also will do more targeted stakeholder outreach. So really focusing in on organizations or stakeholders that represent a larger group within the community. So through this process, trying to understand some of those key challenges and themes to ensure that we are being responsive and understanding how we can incorporate those areas of feedback into the plan. And then the plan itself is designed on an ongoing basis to really rely on information systems that consist of regular, frequent feedback loops from the community, from customers. So for example, a tactic or initiative will likely be continued customer surveying. So we're already looking at customer surveys and the priorities that customers have listed that LTD has provided to us to look back and incorporate those things into the priorities. We're also looking at existing studies and plans that have engaged the community for those themes. And likely there would be metrics that would require actually going out into the community and continuing to ask about perceptions of value and other questions that would help to guide future tactics and initiatives. The plan rollout, similar to the internal communications, would include, again, a very clear plan with owners, with strategic messaging, and the plan itself becomes a living document that is very transparent to the board and to the general public and to the workforce as to how LTD is actually progressing on the things that you're committing to in this plan. So with that, I would like to open it up to discussion and questions. I know that this is a really key area that we want to establish up front so that we're incorporating this into the plan draft as we start to have conversations with folks internally.
Lindsay, can you just touch on whatever responses that you're gathering from stakeholders? How do you plan to share those with the board if you do? What does that look like?
Sure. So that's something that I think we'll perhaps touch on in the next agenda item. What we would like to do is have some dialogue on how you all would prefer to receive it. So with different agencies, we've handled it in different ways. Sometimes we'll do something like periodic updates to the board and sort of briefings during the regular board sessions. We can also call special sessions or work through the strategic planning committee. So I think we're definitely open to what would be most useful and helpful to the board to share some of these key stepping stones along the way.
My apologies, I did not mean to jump ahead.
Oh, no, not at all.
Does anyone on the board have questions or feedback on the communications plan?
Yes.
Stephen, you're up.
Thanks, Caitlin. And Lindsay, thank you for that. That was helpful. So regarding the right-hand side of the slide that we're all looking at now, it mentions stakeholders, but will we as board members get a list of all the stakeholders that you're reaching out to? You correctly, I think you or Mark mentioned that we as board members are the bridge between in one sense, the staff and the community. I just want to make sure that some of the ones that we might know that you don't know because you're not from around here, such as Best, 350 Eugene, the union you mentioned is an obvious one, but there are some very active neighborhood groups also. I just want to make sure that we do a good job of reaching out to all these important stakeholders so it's their voice is well heard.
Sure, and I would say that we're certainly working in collaboration with LTD staff on identification of those key stakeholder groups. So that's definitely something that will rely on local knowledge to establish who the right folks to reach out to. I very much agree that from our vantage, it would be very easy to overlook. So, you know, I think through this process, through the draft of the plan, where it will identify those key stakeholders, that will be an opportunity to see if there's any gaps in the list of stakeholders that are established. But yes, appreciate that.
Anyone else that has a comment? Okay, no for Josh, no for Emily, no for Carl. Okay, great. Thanks so much. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you. So I will, the next portion we wanted to open up, and I'm going to pass to Tom to actually facilitate this, but we understand, you know, that you all have a strategic planning committee and wanted to talk through how that may interface with the process and with the larger board. And we can touch on that element of communication as well, of particularly as it relates to engaging with the board on updates and providing a feedback loop during the process. So Tom, I will pass to you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Right, so like I teed up at the beginning of the meeting today, we wanted to talk about, and based on discussions at the SPC meetings, they're interested in I think, refining what the board has said in terms of SPC's role in the strategic business plan process. Specifically, you had suggested that, you know, with respect to the board and SPC, the board was looking to SPC to basically own the process on the board SPC side of things, and wanted to, you know, we've been talking about, well, what does that mean? How do we do that? And we've at the staff level, we just talked about, well, ultimately you're going to be charged with providing, you SPC, is going to be charged with providing a recommendation to the board with respect to the strategic business plan. And in developing that recommendation, that's where you want to engage your time. What should they be looking for? What do you expect out of them? I think those types of things would be helpful in just helping them be a little bit more specific about what they should be looking for in the course of the development of the strategic business plan, so that they're prepared to give you a recommendation that resonates with what the board's looking for. So questions, thoughts?
Tom, I'm not actually exactly sure what you've queued up. Are you asking for our thoughts about how the SPC, just to react to the SPC's desire to be involved? Or I'm sorry if I'm not following.
Okay, let me try and be more clear. Yeah, so what I think we're looking for is your thoughts and direction to SPC on what they should be looking for, what you expect out of them as they work to develop their recommendation on the strategic business plan. Anything specific that you can provide would be helpful. And just you might recall in the materials that we provided you, we provided a copy of the presentation and the discussion that was kind of informed the discussion of SPC so far around the notion of being good ancestors and ensuring that the goals of the community are evident in the strategic business plan, that there's a clear connection between what they understand, they, SPC, understand the needs and desires and values of the community for transit are reflected in that, in terms of the presence of the goals, but clear connection to the actions and priorities that are set by way of the strategic business plan.
Mark, if you had a guess, where do you think the strategic planning committee is on that teeter-totter?
So if to use my graphic illustration of my teeter-totter, where the management team sits over here, and the CEO sits here, and the president of the board sits here, and the board sits over here, as I understand it, the strategic planning committee is made up of a number of community organizations that provide counsel to the agency, meaning the board and the management team. So it would sit off the plank here on the left-hand side, providing counsel to the board, providing counsel to the management team, but the authority lives, with those that are on the teeter-totter. And I do know from our perspective, and I'm confident from the management team's perspective, we're eager in their counsel to ensure that their voice is actively engaged as we develop the business plan for the agency and the board's ultimate consideration.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I guess, Tom, that would shape my answer a little bit. That's kind of what I was thinking in regards to what does that relationship look like between the board and LTD staff. And so having that visual is really helpful to me. So thank you, Mark. But that's kind of how I'm envisioning that planning committee is that kind of cheerleader support over here. They're not holding the weight of the teeter-totter per se, and they're not like having influence on which way it's going, but they're just kind of that cheerleader being like, you can do it, or like, let's work on this together, or this is a great direction, keep it up, whatever their cheers are. But that's kind of how I'm trying to visualize it and explain what I would think their role would be, is a little less assertive or ingrained in the process. But everyone, please feel free to speak up and give your opinions.
The word I might use would be informed counsel.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. Emily?
So I serve on the strategic planning committee, so please don't feel like I'm intentionally delegating this one direction or another, but I feel like we have a really robust strategic planning committee that is interested in being engaged on this process. And so I would maybe even suggest that the board let the strategic planning committee sort of be the vetting process along the way, and not just sort of a informed bystander. I think they could really be a productive body and provide some of that community and stakeholder feedback that we were talking about earlier. So I'd actually, if I could have my preference, I would say everything goes to strategic planning committee as sort of a vetting process, so that when it comes to the board, it really is, fairly completed, if you will, or as complete as possible without the board's feedback. So that's where I land on that. But of course, we'll be happy to, defer as this group decides.
Josh, do you have any thoughts on this?
I was going to say, Carl also served on the strategic planning committee historically, so he may have some thoughts on that potentially as well.
Yeah, go for it, Carl. I'll chip in a sec, sure.
Oh, sure. No, I agree with Emily. I mean, serving on the strategic planning committee for many years, it represents a diverse group of people, and it is very robust. So I would be supportive of it being involved at every part of the process too. And I think they would want it, and they would want to participate.
Yeah, I can speak to that Carl. I know, and there are several SPC members listening in tonight, but they have been indicating a willingness to meet more often over the course of the next 4 months to do it, what I think you all are speaking to. So.
Yeah, and I'd like to add too that they do represent the community. So as we're looking at stakeholders, we've got city councilors from both cities on it. We've got essentially Lane County commissioners. We've got people from a broad section of the community. So as we're talking about reaching out to stakeholders, that is our stakeholder group. They represent certain parts of our community, and so having that discussion there, I think, would be valuable for everyone. So.
Josh, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'll just comment on one aspect of what the SPC has done, over many years. Sometimes there are particular policy issues that we sense are, new, of interest to certain segments of the community, maybe a lot of the community, and SPC has been a place where essentially work has been kind of delegated or devolved from the board to the SPC to sort of get into the details of some particular area of policy making, and then that advice comes back. I don't know how well that fits into the framework that was laid out, but I would just point out that that's been one of the main roles. It has, I think, when the SPC sort of reached its most recent iteration, it used to be called something else, sort of, I guess for TransPro's sake, it's worth pointing out that it kind of evolved from something that was focused on the bus rapid transit system, which was a sort of, generational communications lift in many ways. I guess what's important about the most recent version of it is that the touch points for the community were sort of acknowledged as front and center from the beginning. When we think about areas of policymaking where we really need to consult with different members of the community and different pockets of the community, that feels like a primary role for the SPC. And so it's kind of, I guess I don't have more to say about it, except I'm not exactly sure where it goes in our current process, but that they're, our primary stakeholder advisory body.
Thanks, Josh. And I'm just going to give a 15-minute warning. We need to make sure this meeting closes out at 5 since we have our regular board meeting at 5:30. So we've got about 15 minutes left.
Well, if I can pick up on what I've heard so far, first of all, Emily, I appreciate what you're talking about. I think that's fairly consistent from kind of when we were talking about the strategic business plan months ago. So, I think that's good. I do also think that it's good that you can play that active role on both SPC and then be on the board as well and go through this process. I think you can help link the two groups together to kind of get into sync. So I think those kinds of things are going to be helpful. I would also just in trying to clarify maybe what we might be looking for as you have listened to Lindsay and Mark talk through what the process is and kind of what the underlying strategy is, what we're trying to achieve with this effort. Do those things at all trigger for you some things that you'd want SPC to pay attention to, have them maybe work on more than maybe some other things? Just curious if there's anything in what you heard tonight that might help inform what you want to see coming back from SPC.
Can we just check in with Stephen and Dawn just really quick since they haven't or contributed yet, just if there's anything they want to say?
Dawn, you want to go first?
Well, I've had very little interaction with the SPC. I've read the minutes after the meetings a few times, but I don't really have anything to add to this discussion.
Okay, thanks, Dawn. Stephen, did you have anything?
Thanks, Caitlin. Just quickly, I like Emily's idea. I think the SBC is a natural funnel, and I think Mark Johnson's comments were spot on, that it's a natural kernel for a representation of a lot of the stakeholders. But again, I'm just going to beat my same drum. I just want to make sure that we do a very good job of reaching out to other stakeholders who may not be as fully represented, if at all, at the SBC. Like 350 Eugene, for instance, is one, and some of the neighborhood groups that have a strong voice and want to be heard and should be heard. Thank you.
And Emily, I saw your mic go off. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
I was just going to say, I think the SBC committee is really good about kind of finding the areas that are going to be sticking points for the board. And so they can really address a lot of things before they even get back around to the board. So I think I don't have anything specific to add, because I think it will be kind of a natural progression.
Thank you, everyone.
Josh,
go ahead.
Oh, yeah, this is a super fast comment. Thank you. Just to reinforce Stephen's point on representation really fast, just having served on the SPC for most of the previous decade, I can say that it was often hard to get people from certain constituencies in the community. I mean, as with any kind of, volunteer advisory body. To Stephen's point, like, we should really take seriously that there are groups that are not going to be represented on the SPC. It is a group that represents lots of different viewpoints, but it by no means is comprehensive, just because of the typical constraints of a body like that. And the second thing I'd say is that there has been, I think, as we build communication systems and habits and formalize some of these pieces, I think it's really important to say that we have had this history of sometimes the SPC there being no clear link between the SBC's work and sort of SPC consciousness and the board. And so sometimes I'm trying to say it in a way that doesn't allocate responsibility or blame, because I don't think it's actually particularly clear, but I think the SBC has sort of drifted one way and the board has drifted another way. And we haven't had formal mechanisms for ensuring that there was communication about the deliberations that were going on. So, yeah, important to say as we kind of build new systems.
Well said, Josh. Thank you for pulling that out so nicely.
All right, we now have about 10 minutes left, Tom, if we want to move on.
Yeah, and I think we've got some things to work with. I plan on meeting with Leah and Marianne here on Friday, I think it is, and just going over what they've heard and trying to come up with a more specific action plan for SPC. So I think this has been helpful. And I think that's all we have for you, unless Lindsay and Mark.
Yeah, I was just going to say that was the end of the formalized agenda for the work session. We're happy to spend a bit of time if there are any further questions or comments or feedback for our consideration for the process as we move forward. But really appreciate the dialogue and the guidance kicking off the project.
I guess my question is for you, Mark and Lindsay, who is the keeper of the scorecard and what does that look like in the future?
Yeah, I can start off and then Mark, feel free to jump in. So, every agency is a little bit different. I don't know if LTD has decided exactly who will be the keeper, but usually it is helpful to have a central body. I think it is likely if I could be so bold to suggest, it's probably going to likely end up in the planning area, just based on the involvement in the project management of the project and being a natural place of bringing together data. So what we see being successful in other agencies is that if there is a central place, and it could be an external party as well, that the data is compiled and calculated and then prepared and then shared on a regular basis with the directors group, that is shared with the teams that are in each of the departments, and then that it's presented to the board. The process is designed so that that's done at least on a quarterly basis. So you have a chance to look at each quarter how it's progressing. But each metric would have a specific owner, and they would be responsible for actually ensuring that, based on a very clear definition of what the metric is measuring, based on a very specific definition of the information system that it's coming from, so that there's consistency each time it's measured the same way. If there's change in staff, that there's clarity around how it was being calculated and compiled, and then that becomes part of the systematic process. Mark, Ash, or anyone at Lane, Tom, any other additions to that specific question?
You know, I might distinguish between, because you used the word owner as well as I think, Caitlin, you framed the question in terms of keeper, and there's a difference that's important in this process. The owner is the responsible party. The keeper is, you know, we're going to frame up and structure the measurements and kind of put everything together in terms of organization-wide stuff, but there's going to be individual owners throughout the organization that work with this. And Mark, I'd ask you to weigh in as well.
Yeah, it's a good question that you ask, Madam President. It's a very good question that you ask. You know, I think some clients that we work with and build out a strategic plan attempt to be both the keeper and the owner of the performance metrics, and oftentimes will struggle. There are others where they will be the owner of the metric, and we actually work to be their performance management unit. So we actually compile the results in Sacramento and Memphis, Cleveland, Charlotte, et cetera, and present to the management team and to the board on a quarterly basis the performance against the outcomes. So different models, and we can certainly talk about that as we get deeper into making your business plan come alive.
Thank you. I mean, that doesn't seem like it's too out of whack. We have auditors that do the same thing, right? And so that makes a lot of sense to me. Any other questions from board members? Probably have time for one or two. Josh?
Well, actually, this is just a quick process point. If I'm not mistaken, the slides that were presented are a little bit different from the slides from TransPro that are included in the packet. And I just want to make sure, for public disclosure purposes, that we get the full presentation on the website at some point.
I believe that's been done.
And now that we're recording this on video, everyone has access to watch this video as well.
Yeah, I want to spare people the needless hassle of taking screenshots. I think that's all. But thank you if it's been done, Tom. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so this is actually available on our website in the standard location, and it is also now available on LCOG's Metro TV site as well, which is also linked in our web calendar.
Great. Well, I just want to take this opportunity, and I'm sure the board will join me in thanking Mark and Lindsay for all this great work. This is so impressive and exciting. And, you know, it's great that we all have these great questions and we're feeling very invested in the process. So thank you for those one-on-ones and taking the time to do that, because that was such a great way to kick off our relationship and really just get our expectations moving forward. And thank you to the LTD staff as well that is engaging in this process. We know it's time consuming, but we know that you're just going to do the best job. And so thank you to all the LTD staff and management. So And then Tom, of course, thank you for you presenting today as well. We really appreciate you being here. So I think we're done. I'm going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting, but huge thank you. And I will see all of our board members at 5:30. Please remember to log on 5 to 10 minutes early, as we will begin recording right on time. Meeting is adjourned.